Hello all, welcome to Tech Planet's video tutorials. Today we are going to go over how to use Rest Assured for web services automation. So this is a beginner's tutorial and we are going to cover the following items, which is what is a Rest Assured and how do we create test cases using Rest Assured, and how can we perform HTTP operations using Rest Assured. How do we handle the assertions? How do we pass headers and authentication, extract values after validation from a response, and use POJO to process request and response. So on a high level, these are the things which we are going to cover as part of this video tutorial. Okay, so stay tuned. We are going to get started in a bit. All right. So a little prerequisites before we get started. So I would safely assume that everybody who is going to watch this tutorial will have a basic understanding of Java and then basic knowledge of RESTful web services and understanding of Maven and a little knowledge on JUnit. So if you're not familiar with Maven and JUnit, don't worry about it too much. It is just like we're just gonna use it very minimally. So Maven will be using it to add the dependencies or the libraries which are required for this particular hands-on session, and JUnit is helping us to build test cases. Okay, so that's the end of the theory part. Now let's get started. All right, so I'm going to use Eclipse as my IDE. Okay, so as part of the first step, I'm going to create a Maven project, right? So let's create a simple Maven project. Let's say com.techplanet.rest examples like rest example. Okay. All right, so here we go. We have a Maven structure now. Okay, so now to utilize the Rest Assured, right? We need to add the Rest Assured libraries. Even before we go there, what is a Rest Assured? Right? This is our first point. Rest Assured is nothing but a library, a Java-based library, which can be used to perform testing of web services, mainly REST-based web services. So as an automation tester or a tester who wanted to exercise REST web services, they could very well use Rest Assured libraries. It has all the necessary functions and libraries or all the features required to perform REST web services automation. Okay, so that is Rest Assured. Now go back to the Eclipse. We have the structure here. So we need to add dependencies, which are the libraries required. As I was saying, we will be adding JUnit and Rest Assured dependencies. So just for easiness, I have it copied here. So don't worry about this. I'm going to share this code in Techie Planet's website, so you could very well go there and check out this or download it. So for the time being, let's only add JUnit and Rest Assured. Okay, so if anything is required on our way, we will add it later. All right. Okay, now let's get started with the very basic get method. Okay, before we go there, let me start get validations. Okay, let me put it well, let me say get validation test. All right, com.techplanet.test. Okay, so we have a class. Now let's see how we are going to organize our test cases, right? Or what are we going to do exactly? Let me put it as steps here. Step 1, we are going to prepare a request. It could be a GET request, it could be the post request, delete, put the basic HTTP operations. But anyways, we are going to prepare a request. That's our first step. Now step 2, send request and receive response. Okay, so the first step we have prepared, we will prepare a request, then we will send it, we will receive a response. That's not enough, right? We gotta validate the response. So this is on a high level. Anyone who performs web services test automation, they are gonna do only this. Whatever happens within the code, right? It could be very complex requests, or it could be very simple request. Whatever it is, on a high level, these are the 3 steps anybody is going to do. Okay, let's keep that in mind. And the basic operations which we just mentioned are get, which is to get a record, post, which is to create, put is to modify, and delete is to remove the record. Okay. And in this example, we will technically make use of JSON, which is technically a data exchange format. We will be using in REST Assured in this particular video tutorial. You could pass the payload of a web service as JSON or text or CSV. There are many different variations, but JSON is pretty much widely used, so we will stick with that. Okay. Now let's get started. Let's write our first step, first test case. Okay. So let's say public void get users. Okay. Okay. Now this is a very basic function. Let me make it as a test case. So I'm gonna add a test annotation, which is a JUnit annotation, right? If you're not familiar with that, this is JUnit is a library which will help us, create test cases. So now this will act as a test case. Okay. How do we make a get call, or how do we make a web service call? To do that, we first need a web service, correct? Okay, let's see. If you look at here, this particular website, right, they offer free APIs. Anybody wanted to learn something, or anybody wanted to exercise some test cases, they could play around with these APIs. They have pretty much the basic methods here: get, post, put, patch, delete, everything. So we are gonna make use of this API. Okay, so when I share the code, you could very well go there and execute it, right? Because this is available as part of the internet. Okay, now let me make a call. Okay, let's do this. Let me say I'm gonna make a get call here. Okay, this is the URL I'm gonna use to make a call. Okay. Alright, sorry. Let me reduce my zoom. Okay, that was too bad. Alright, now this is the response. If you look at it, I got a data object, I got overall a JSON object, and then inside that a data object. Then it has ID, first name, last name, and after. Okay, so now we are gonna use this particular URL for our get example. Okay, so since we are using REST Assured, we will start with REST Assured dot, alright, given. So in REST Assured, the typical syntax is you are setting you're telling the REST Assured that, okay, I'm gonna give you something. When I give you that, do something and then perform this operation. That is how the syntax work. Okay, so in this case, I'm gonna tell REST Assured that, okay, REST Assured dot given, sorry, okay, base URI. What is a base URI? If you look at the same example, give me 1 second guys. Okay. If you look at this particular URL, you will see https://reqres.in/API/ blah 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 blah, right? So up to this domain, up to the .com or .in, whatever it is, the extension, that is called the base URI. So I'm gonna tell rest assured, okay, I'm gonna give you this base URI and my base path. Base path is nothing but my service path. Okay, in this case, let's consider this as my base path. Okay, API/user/1. In some cases we don't use this parameters, but this is my API path. Let's assume like that. Okay, so this is my base path. So I am telling rest assured, given you have this base URI and the base path, do a get. All right, now this will perform a get request. Okay, but how do I know it actually performed a get request? How do I capture the response? So to do that, we are gonna make use of a response class, and we will create an object of response class from rest assured. Let's import that. Okay, so if you look at here, this is the rest assured class which we used here, and this is the response class. Both are from rest assured. Yeah, okay. So now let me move a little here so it will be easy for you guys. I am telling get me the response when get me the response given this is my base URL and this is my base path. Let's print it. Right, so response. Well, response is an object, so you obviously have to convert that into a string to print it, right? Or to see what it is inside. To do that, we will get the body portion of it and then say like as string. Let's see what it is gonna do. Okay, look at that. It printed the same structure. Let's go ahead and see what it is, right? Look, this is a JSON object and it has a data, ID, first name, last name, and avatar. Okay, so that is at this point we made a get call and we printed the response. Okay, let's keep that test case as is. Okay, let me comment it as right, basic get call. Okay, so if you are an automation tester, right, or if you are a developer, when you develop your code, when you write a unit test, or when you are an automation tester, when you write your automation code, making just a call doesn't serve your purpose, right? You have to validate that. So how do you validate it? There are multiple ways we could validate the response and the status code and everything. Let's go over one by one. Okay, so the next one we are gonna validate status code using assertion. Okay, so let me copy the same test. Okay, let me say get user status code. Okay, now in this particular method, what we are going to do is we are going to make use of the built-in assertions. The rest assured provides different kinds of mechanisms to validate the response, the status code, and all those things. So we are going to make use of that to validate the status code. Yeah, okay, so we're going to make a little change in our request format. So we're going to say rest assured given my base URI is this, my base path is this. Okay, now I'm gonna say when I do a get, right? Then yep, then validate that my status code is 200. So typically 200 is a success status code. Okay, so that is what we are gonna validate. So it's throwing an error. The reason is we can't assign this particular return type to a response class. It is a different one. If you look at here, it should be validatable response, but let's just ignore that. We don't need this at this point in time, so let's delete that. Let me delete that, right? Because we are already validating the status code, which we were supposed to do. Okay, so we don't technically need this. Okay, I'm just formatting it so it looks good. All right, now what are we gonna do? We're gonna say rest assured given these URLs and the service path, then do a get and then validate the status code. Let's run it. Okay, so there you go. This is the first print statement, and if you look at the JUnit, it has two test cases, both are passed, right? So let me comment this out, right? Let me comment the first one out. Okay, now let's make sure it actually works fine. Let me change that to 201. Okay, so it should technically throw me an error. Look at that. It says expected status code is 201, which I supplied here, but the actual was 200, right? So that is how you validate the status code using rest assured. Okay, so this is fully we are using all the rest assured functions to perform the validation. Okay. Now you had seen that when we performed a get operation, we got this particular response. So just validating a status code doesn't always help us. We might have to validate the content of the response. Okay, let's see different ways to do that. All right, now let me comment it out again. Well, and let me copy this. Let's say validate response content using rest assured. Okay, let me paste that. I think I didn't copy that prices. Okay, all right, validate get user validate content. Okay, so we could validate the status code and the content together. There is no problem with that. So let's do that. I'm just gonna add one more piece of code here. I'm gonna say within the body, I'm gonna map the path. Okay, let's take a look at the response again. This was the response we got. So if you look at here, within this JSON object, I have a data object, right? Within the data object, I have these four elements: ID, first name, last name, and avatar. Okay, let's validate the first name. Okay, so how do you validate the first name? If you look at here, the path to first name is data dot first underscore name, because this is inside the data object, right? Let me copy that, and I'm gonna say data dot first name. Now, how do I validate that? Okay, so to do that, we are gonna say contains string. You could say equals also. I'm just gonna say contains. So this is the Hamcrest contains, or the matching well, what do you say, matchers, right? For contains. You have these as part of the libraries which we have included, so don't worry about that. This will be imported. Contain string. What was the first name again? Let's check it. George. Okay, Come on. Okay, it's not getting imported. That's because it's probably the static one. So let me import it manually, right? Or dot hamcrust. Yeah, I have to import it specifically because it's just dot core measures. Core just dot. There you go. Import static. Alright, so we should be good. Okay, let's run it and see. I think that command overlapped there. Let's run it. Okay, it passed. So let's make sure it actually worked, right? Tech e planet. Okay, so it should ideally fail because the expected first name is planet and the actual is George. See, it failed. Look, I expected a string containing, sorry, techie planet, and then the actual is George. Okay, let me make it pass. So when I share it with you guys, it will be easy. So let me comment that, right? Now, so this is the built-in way of this is the mechanism which rest assured supplies us to validate the response content and the status code. Now let's say we don't want to use this, right? We could very well use the JUnit assertions, but since we are using JUnit, we could even go with JUnit assertions. Let's see how do we do that. Okay, let's copy this itself, right? Let's say validate status code using JUnit. Okay, so I'm gonna say the same example, rest assured dot given base URI base path. When you do a get, that's it. I don't need anything else because I'm gonna use JUnit to validate, but I need to capture the response. So this time I need the response object, right? Okay, so look at that, right? I'm gonna store all the response to the response object. Now I am gonna use the JUnit's assert methods, EQUALS. Okay, so let's say status code validation. Now we're gonna expect 200, and let's say response dot get status code. Okay, let me import that. Let's make it 201 and then let it fail, right? Then we'll correct it. Run must JUnit. Okay, it failed. 201 but 200. So let me make it 200. Let's run it again. Yep, it's fine. Now we just validated the status code, right? So that's not enough. Let's validate the content. So there are multiple ways you could validate the content. Okay, even with the JUnits itself, you could capture that content in different ways. Okay, so let's use the let me explain this. Let's use JSON path as our first example on this one. Let me comment it out. Now validate content using JSON path. So JSON path is one of the classes or one of the mechanisms which Rest Assured provides, right? So you could capture the response and make it as a JSON path. So you could just supply the path and get all the retrieve all the contents of the response. Let's say in our example, if this is our response, right? The same way we mentioned data.firstname, the same way we could make use of JSON path and iterate through all those fields or validate the contents. We could do all those things using JSON path. So let's see how do we do that. Okay. So instead of response, we are gonna say JSON path. Okay. So this is just an added example I'm gonna show you guys. You could very well use the general response itself, but it's good to know different ways to validate the same thing, right? So now I'm gonna say get dot JSON path. That's it. It's that simple. So I don't have to mention within the body or anywhere, right? I'm gonna say JSON path. Let's validate the first name, right? Let's say George1, and I'm gonna say JSON path dot what do you get string. So if you look at this, right, when you convert into JSON path, there are lots of methods available here. So if the response is a boolean, you could use get boolean. If the response is a character, you could use this double, float, int. All those features are available. That's why I'm showing you guys the usage of JSON path, right? It's in many times you will feel like very handy. That let's say you have a number which is coming, an age of a person, right? You wanted to validate that it's an integer, correct? So you don't have to convert this and do all those things. So you could very well use the JSON path. Okay, now in our case it's string. So I'm gonna say JSON get string. Again, the path is exactly the same, data dot first name. I think we had it here. Yeah. Let me copy it. All right. Okay. Let's validate. It will fail because we have given us George1, but the expected is George. Yeah. So the expected is, the expected is George1 and the actual is George. So that's why it failed. It's that simple. Okay. So you could continue the validation for other fields as well. Let's say you want to validate the last name, you could do that. You want to validate the avatar, you could do that. You want to validate the ID, you could do that. So it's all that straightforward. Okay. Now let me cut it and put it. Okay. Let's say you don't want to deal with all this, JSON path stuff. Okay. You just wanted to know that, you just wanted to capture the actual response for one or the other reasons, right? And then using that response object, you need to validate. Let's do that. Okay, it's the same validation, we are doing it in different ways. Okay, keep that in mind, please. Validate content using let's put it as JUnit. Yeah, here also we use JUnit, but we use JSON path and JUnit. Okay, here JUnit and response. Alright. So if you're gonna use the response, then we're gonna cast that into a response object. Okay. So we are gonna technically extract that content as a response object. So we're gonna say get, then once I have the get call is done, okay, then extract the response. See, look at the syntax. This is the beauty of Rest Assured. It's like you are reading a plain English statement, right? You are telling Rest Assured, given these URLs and the URI, right? When I do a get, then extract the response. to response object. That's all it's saying. Same, you're gonna okay, let me correct that. Content validation, it's not status code. Content validation charge. So the same way, instead of response.path, so you're gonna say response.get the path. The path remains the same everywhere, right? Even if you are putting it inside the body, or you are using the response object, or you are using the JSON path, the path remains the same, right? The mechanism of locating that particular element is same. So let's run it, let it fail, we'll correct it. Okay, it failed because it was George 1 and we wanted George. Alright, let me run it. Okay, it passed. So that is on a high level the basic get operation, right? So let's see, we performed, let me uncomment this. Alright, so why is that an error? Get user validate content. Okay, using rest assured. This is using JUnit. I had copy paste error. So JSON path get user validate content code. Okay, cool. So let's see. So we have the plain get users method which prints the output, prints the response. Then we are going to validate the status code using rest assured, then the content using rest assured, then the content using the status code and the content using JUnit, then using JSON path, then using the response object. So we had seen multiple ways to perform assertions and how to make a get call. Okay, so now we will move on to a little bit more advanced. Well, I wouldn't call it as more advanced. We just now finish the get operation, right? Let's move on to post. Let me say post. Okay, let me copy this content, just the basic one, right? Okay, let me say create user. All right, so before we go there, right, let's see how are we gonna create a user. Like basically it's a post request. Okay, so this is the endpoint. Well, this is the endpoint, and you are gonna give, let's say, tech a planet. Okay, last name, and say okay. See, it created, and then it has an ID, first name, last name, avatar. This is the payload. So whatever you supply within the request, it's usually called as a payload. Okay, so in this case we are supposed to pass a JSON object which should minimum have a first name, last name, and avatar. Okay, some fields are optional, but let's assume all those things are required, right? Okay, so how do we pass that, right? That is, how can I make this format and supply this to rest assured, right? So we will be using POJO for that. So what is a POJO? Plain old Java object, which is nothing but a Java class or a Java object which has like few elements, and the get method and the set method to set and retrieve those values. Okay, that's all in a nutshell. So how do you create that, right? So let's look at, so in this case, to receive the response also, we need the same POJO, right? So let's look at the response object. See, it's returning pretty much everything along with ID and created at field. Okay, so we are going to create a class with all these fields. Let's see that. Let's call it as user. Okay, user. So this is our POJO class. Okay, now we need how many elements? First name, last name, avatar, ID, and create. Okay. So let's say private. Is that an integer? Let's see. Okay. No, it's a string. Everything is a string here. Okay. So let's say private string ID, private string first name, private string last name. My bad. Private string avatar, right? And what else? Let's add the created at also. We don't need the created at or the ID to as part of the request payload, but since the response has the field along with the other fields, we don't have to create a different class. Let's put it here only. Okay, so I'm gonna do it here. Okay, now we need to make it as a POJO. To do that, we need to create the getters and setters. So source, generate getters and setters, select all, generate. Okay, so my POJO class is ready. Okay, let me add a comment. So okay, apply request payload and let's say response. All right. Okay. Now let's see here. Okay. Obviously we did a post method, so this should be post. Okay, no doubt. Now what did we, so we are gonna say again the same structure, rest assured, given I have this base URI and base path. Okay, and what did I do? I passed a JSON object as part of the payload, right, as part of the body. Okay, so I should tell rest assured that the content type is a JSON, right? So I need to set that, given the content type and type. There are different types, different content types we could pass, but in our case it's a JSON, so the standard format is application slash JSON. It could be text slash CSV or plain text, whatever it is, right? So you set the content type, but still you didn't give the body. Okay, so let's do that body also. Given body. Okay, so where is my body? To do that, I need to create an object of my user class. This is my user class which I created, right? So let's say user equal to new user. Cool, I have the user. Now at this point this user doesn't have any values, right? It's just a brand new one. So I'm gonna set all the elements which I need to supply. If you look at the request, we have supplied the first name, last name, and avatar. Okay, let's at least add those. Username.set first name. Okay, let's say tech. Come on, user.set last name. ePlanet. Now user dot set avatar, right? w.techeplanet.com. Okay, so now I have my user object ready. So can I supply it here? Well, I can. So I have given within the body I have given an object. So just applying just that object might not work because Rust Assured requires an extra library for it to serialize the object. Okay, so what do you mean by serialize? You are making it as a stream, right? You can't just supply an object. So just think it in this way, that this is converted to a proper JSON format and sending it. Okay, think it in that way for easy understanding. In short, we need to add a library for serializing this. So in our case, we are going to use the Jackson library. Right, I have it, the dependency ready here. Like I said, I'll be sharing this code, so you could just copy paste the dependency. Now, okay, let's print the response here, right? We know how to validate a response and all those things, so we don't have to worry about that now. But let's print it and see what it is doing. Run JUnit. Oh, it created. See, the ID is 614. First name is Tech. Last name is ePlanet. Avatar is this. Created at blah blah blah. Let me put it in a better format. So JSON. Look at that. So we have a record created. Okay. So okay, I'm happy that I got a record created. Now, how do I make it back into an object like this, right? So I know I have a record created, but I need that in a Java class, right? In a Java object for me to further process it. How do I do that? That is our next test case. All right. Now let's copy the same thing. Okay. Now create user. I'm just calling it as TC realize response, right? Because the response content, you are gonna map it back to an object of this user class. Okay. Now let's take it out. I'm gonna say user and user response. Right, so this is the user response. So obviously this will throw an error because it can't just take it post. So what am I gonna do? I'm gonna say post as my class. So my class is user.class. It's that simple, guys. Okay, so when I run this test, I'll get an object of user class with all these fields populated in it. Let me comment our first test case. Okay. So how do I know that? Let's print it. This out. Let's say first name from request request object plus user dot get first name. Now let's say first name from response object. So user response dot first name. Okay, let's validate this also. Obviously this is the objective of we converting that into an user object is to validate it, right? First name validation. So this is what I'm expecting because I supplied this, and this is what I'm getting. Okay, let's see if both are same. Assert equals. Okay. All right, let me run it. There you guys see, request object user.get first name and the response object user response.get first name. See, the beauty of this is you have an object of user class now, whatever the response you're getting. You could take it and then further process whatever the way you want it. Okay, that is the post method. Now let me uncomment this, and I'm not gonna go detail into the response validation because it's the same the way we handled it in the get operation here, right? You could technically copy this and then use it here. But this is very important, the POJO, the usage of POJO in rest assured. So guys, explore this with different examples, by creating your own classes, right? Keep this as a baseline. Now let me create another class, post and delete. It is pretty much the same. The only thing is, let me copy one from post. Yeah, let's use the same example here. Let's modify. Oh, my bad. It should be put and delete, and not okay. Where is refactor? Yeah, put. I'm gonna copy our post command, and then I'm gonna say put. Okay, so let's say I'm gonna modify this. Yeah, I'm gonna modify the existing name to tech e planet, and okay, to show that, let me show you guys what exactly we have. So this is the endpoint, and it has ID first name, last name as George, Pluth, and this URL. Okay, so when we do a put, what are we gonna do is we are gonna modify that record. That is the put command. Okay, now let's try it in rest assured. Okay, it says updated at avatar, last name, first name. So I could serialize it, deserialize it back to a user class by adding a updated at tag, right? Or since you guys know that, I'm gonna just skip it. I'll just make sure I'm gonna get the response code as 200, the same way we did okay, put validation. Status code, $200. Let's run it. Oops. All right, so this is my where do I have an error? Okay, okay, so it modified, and the status code it validates as 200, so which means the update operation is performed well. Now delete. So I'm gonna go fast with delete because it's just a simple call. Delete user. Okay, again, you don't need this POJO or anything for that. This POJO is only required in our examples. It's only required for post and put, because you're going to create and modify a request. So you need a payload. So when you need a payload, you need some content to be passed. So in our case, we have created a Java class and then created an object and then supplied. So we're going to take this out. We're not sending it as JSON or anything. We are going to delete. So in this case, right, we are going to delete this particular record 1. Okay, base path. You could even take this out and say like, okay, 1 here. That should also work. So the delete validation, let me comment the previous test case. Ideally, it should not return anything. Okay, which means it shouldn't be returning any content except the status code. So the content should be 204. I'm gonna give it 200 and see what it's gonna throw. Okay, we will correct if it is once it throws error. Yeah, see 204, which means no content is returned because it was a delete operation. Right? If I do that again, yep, it deleted. So don't worry that it is deleting the same record again and again because it's a test web service, so you could delete a number of times. In a real life web service, once you are done with the deletion, you're not allowed to do that again. You'll probably get an error. Okay, so that is the basic HTTP operations. Now we will see a little bit of other basic things as well. For example, how do you set up authentication headers, authentication or header parameters, right? So authentication is required when you are, let's say you are testing a website, testing a web service, right? Nobody will let you access their web service unless you pass a license key or a basic authentication or some kind of headers to validate that you are a genuine user, you are a real user, and you are authorized to do all this operation. So let's see how do we do that. Okay, it's fairly simple, guys. Let me copy a get operation from. Okay, now let me create a class. Authentication and header. So there are multiple ways you could implement the authentication. So we're gonna show the basic HTTP auth. Okay. Authentication. Let's say how to pass basic HTTP username and password, right? Wow, that's a lot of spelling mistake. Okay, all right, so in this case, with the given itself, you could say dot auth. So this is rest assured has pretty much, the functions are pretty much available for anything you can think of, right? So it's fairly easy, basic. You could pass a username. Username is like, let's say admin. Okay, so that's it, you're good. Now again, you can validate your response by using the standard assertions and all those things, but this is how you pass an basic HTTP username and password. Okay, we're good. Now, so let's forget about the authentication, right? There might be some instances you might be asked to supply header parameters. Let's say you have a license key, right, for a particular service, and you are being asked to pass the license key as a header. So we will see how do you pass a header. Header. So don't worry about that. Headers are passed as key value pairs. Okay, header. Well, let's see the basic one. Let's say you are being asked to pass a license key. You will say license key or whatever the key the server expects you to pass, and then the value of the license key, right? Of the license key. There you go. Okay, so that is on a high level the authentication and headers, how you could pass. Now we'll quickly cover one more minor topic, and then we will wrap it up. So how do we optimize these requests, right? Let's see how do we do that. Let me again create a class optimization test, right? Let me add test to everything because JUnit might throw error if you run it together. Okay. All right. So we were about to optimize our test, right? Uh, Let me copy this. Okay. So you had seen this particular section, setting the base URI and the base path on all the test cases which we have written, right? So think about this. In a class, let's say I have like 50 test cases. I'm duplicating this thing everywhere. And tomorrow, let's say my team decides, okay, this is not your URL is something else. So I end up, cleaning up my files everywhere, or like I need to do a find and replace or wherever I'm using it. It's not an optimized code, right? So how do you do that? Well, rest assured gives you a wonderful thing to do that. That is called request specification. Okay, so you could technically build a specification for the request and use that spec on all your requests. Okay, let's see how do we do that. Okay, let's say request specification spec equal to new, but no, let's just leave it like that, right? Then let's import it. Okay, so you can't just create the request specification without a builder. Okay, so to create a request specification you need a request spec builder. Now what is that thing? Let's take a look at it. Request spec builder. So you'll call it as, let's say, request spec builder equal to new request spec builder. All right, now using the request spec builder you're gonna build these things. Request.spec builder equal to set base URI. All right, let's copy this thing and put it here. Now request.spec URL.set base path. Okay, let's say I'm gonna add my content type also, right? Well, content type. All right, now I'm gonna build it. I'm gonna say request spec equal to request spec builder dot build. So that will create the specification required for me to run this test. Now how do I do that? Let's see. Key1, instead of all these things I'm gonna say spec equal to this one. So let's run it. See, it's the same response, but I reduced my code to make it simple. Now I don't have to put it in the same test case itself because that doesn't serve the purpose. So I could put it in the before class. This is again the JUnit before class function or before class annotation, which will run just before starting that class, just before executing any test cases in that class. I'm just mentioning so you know in case you are not familiar, you'll know it. Let's say public static create, what do we call, spec. Okay. All right. So let me make it as here. Okay. Now let me set it here. Right. I'm gonna explain it once I move this code, so I might have to make it a static. Yeah. All right, and then this also static. Okay. Fine. So now let's see if it runs fine. Okay, it ran. So what I did was, like, I moved the specification builder to uh, the before class method, which means, let's say if I have like 50 test cases like this, which only uses a spec object, then I don't have to duplicate my all this code in each and every test case. I could just use it here. So that is how we could optimize this test. And one other very minor thing, let's say, let me create another, let me rename this as get users using spec request spec. Now get users optimized given. So if you remember, we have used everywhere rest assured dot given, rest assured dot given, right? You don't specifically have to say rest assured dot given. You can just say given. I just mentioned it in the beginning, so I wanted you to be familiar with that. If you're not aware about it, that's why I mentioned rest assured dot given. So I could just import it here, right? It's a static import. So I'll say import. Let me copy it. Should be here. Yeah. So I'll say rest assured static dot given. That's it. See, no errors. It works. Now let me run it. Okay. So that's all for today. So please, if you like the video, like it and subscribe the videos, and watch for the next episode or next video tutorial. I will be having a little more advanced tutorial for the advanced users, or by the time you are done with this tutorial, we'll have the next one ready and available for you. Okay, thanks for watching. Thanks again. Good learning.